I've spent more years than I care to count looking into the eyes of people who think they can play me. It started back in the Marines, where discipline wasn't just a word, it was the only thing that kept you and the guy next to you alive. Then I took that mindset to the streets of Chicago as a cop. When you walk the beat in a city like that, you don't just see the world, you see the parts of it that most people try to pretend don't exist. I've stood in hallways that smelled like decay and desperation, listening to people tell me lies while the evidence of their crimes was literally staining their hands or reflecting in the eyes of a terrified witness. I've seen it all. I've heard every excuse in the book, from the I didn't mean it to the it wasn't me to the they started it. And after decades of dealing with the worst of humanity, you develop a certain kind of sense. It's not just an instinct, it's a physical weight you carry. You can feel a lie before the person even opens their mouth. You see it in the way they won't hold your gaze, the way their hands shake, or worse, the way they stare you down with a cold, calculated defiance because they think they're smarter than everyone else in the room. But I'm not here to be your friend. I'm not here to hold your hand and tell you it's going to be okay when you've done something reprehensible. I've lost my patience for the games. I've lost my patience for the people who think they can use a child as a pawn in their own twisted little war of words. When I walked onto that stage today, I didn't care about the cameras, the lights, or the audience. I cared about a child who doesn't have a voice because their parents are too busy screaming at each other to listen. I looked at the case file before I stepped out there. It was one of those files that makes you want to go home and hug your own kids a little tighter. We had a mother and a father, two people who were supposed to be the ultimate shield for their child, the one safe place in a dangerous world. Instead, they were standing there accusing each other of the unthinkable. Physical abuse. One says the other hit the kid. The other says it was a setup, a lie concocted to win a custody battle or just to inflict pain. They're pointing fingers like it's a game of playground tag, but the stakes are a hell of a lot higher than a bruised ego. This isn't about who gets the car or who keeps the house. This is about a small, defenseless human being caught in a crossfire of two people who clearly shouldn't have been in charge of a goldfish, let alone a kid. The mother, she comes in looking like the victim. She's crying, she's shaking, she's telling me how much she loves her baby and how she would never do anything to hurt them. But I've seen that act before. I've seen people cry in command while their heart is as cold as a Chicago winter. Then you've got the father standing there with his chest puffed out, acting like the world is out to get him, claiming he's the one who's been wronged, the one who's being framed. They both wanted the polygraph. They both claimed they had nothing to hide. They both looked me dead in the eye and told me the other person was the monster. But here's the thing about monsters. They usually think they're the hero of their own story. And my job, the only reason I still do this, is to tear that story down and find the truth buried under the wreckage. The air in the studio was thick. You could feel the hatred between them radiating off the stage. It's a specific kind of energy, a toxic mix of guilt and projection. I've sat in interrogation rooms smaller than a closet where the tension was less suffocating than what I felt looking at these two. I looked at the photos of the injuries. Every time I see a picture of a child with a bruise they didn't earn, a part of me wants to just walk off and never come back. But then I remember that if I walk away, who's left to stand up for that kid? The system? Sometimes the system fails. The lawyers? They're just looking for a win. No, I stay because someone has to be the one to say enough. Someone has to be the one to look these people in the eye and tell them exactly what they are without sugarcoating it. I told them both before we even got started, if you're lying to me, I'm going to find out. I told them the polygraph doesn't have a bias. It doesn't care about your tears or your anger. It only cares about the physiological response of a nervous system trying to hide a sin. I started by talking to the mother. Her name was Sarah. She sat there with her shoulders hunched, trying to look small. She told me a story about how she came home and found a mark on her son's back, and how the father, Marcus, told her the kid just fell. She said she knew in her heart he was lying. She sounded convincing. She had the right words. But there was something in the way she kept glancing at Marcus, looking for a reaction that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't the look of a terrified victim. It was the look of someone checking to see if their punch landed. Then I turned to Marcus. He was the opposite. He was loud. He was aggressive. He kept interrupting her, calling her a liar, saying she was the one who was unstable. He claimed she did it to herself or she did it to the kid to get back at him. It was a circus, and I was the one who had to bring order to it. I sat there, leaning forward, letting them feel my presence. I didn't raise my voice yet. I didn't have to. I just watched them. I watched the way Marcus's jaw tightened when I mentioned the specific dates of the incidents. I watched the way Sarah's eyes darted to the floor when I asked her why she waited 3 days to take the child to the doctor. That's the part that always gets me, the delay. If someone hurts my kid, I'm not waiting 3 days. I'm not waiting 3 minutes. I'm through the door and at the hospital or the police station before the person who did it can even blink. When parents wait, it's usually for one of two reasons. They're trying to hide what happened, or they're trying to figure out a story that keeps them both out of trouble. Neither of those reasons is acceptable to me. I told them that their he said, she said routine was insulting to the child who was actually suffering. They both started defensive, trying to explain away the gaps in their stories. I was scared, she said. I didn't think it was that bad, he said. Every word out of their mouths felt like another layer of paint on a wall that was already crumbling. I told them to shut up and listen. I told them that I've spent 30 years listening to people like them, and I'm tired. I'm tired of the excuses. I'm tired of the way people treat their children like property instead of human beings. I told them that the results of the polygraph were in my hand, and by the time I was done, the truth would be the only thing left standing in that room. You could see the shift then. The bravado started to leak out of Marcus. Sarah's tears stopped being so frequent. The reality of what was about to happen started to set in. They weren't just performing for a camera anymore. They were facing a man who had the power to strip away their masks. And believe me, there is nothing a liar hates more than the truth. I looked down at the envelope in my hand. It's just a piece of paper, really, but in this room, it's the weight of a person's entire life. I've held thousands of these. I know the texture of the paper, the way the seal feels when I rip it open, and the way the air in the room just vanishes the second I touch the flap. I looked at Marcus. He was sweating now, the kind of sweat that doesn't come from the heat of the stage lights. It's that cold, oily sweat that happens when your subconscious knows the walls are closing in. Then I looked at Sarah. She had gone completely still. It's a different kind of tell. Some people explode. Some people freeze like prey, hoping the predator won't see them if they don't move. I've seen both a million times. I told them, I'm going to read these questions, and I want you to remember that you sat in that room with a professional examiner, you had the sensors on your chest, you had the blood pressure cuff on your arm, you had every opportunity to tell the truth before it got to this point, but you didn't. One of you, or both of you, decided to gamble with the truth. And the thing about gambling with the truth is that the facts always wins in the end. I started with Sarah. I wanted to see her face when I read the questions she was asked. Sarah, the examiner asked you, did you physically strike your son on the night he was injured? You said no. Did you cause those marks on his back? You said no. Do you know for a fact who caused those injuries? You said Marcus did. I paused, letting the words hang there. I could hear a pin drop in that studio. I've always found it ironic how the loudest people become the quietest when the truth is about to be read. Sarah's bottom lip started to quiver, but she kept her eyes locked on mine. She was trying to sell the innocence one last time. I looked at the paper. Sarah, in regards to those questions, the polygraph determined you were lying. The room erupted. Marcus jumped out of his chair, pointing his finger, screaming that he knew it. He knew she was a monster. Sarah buried her face in her hands, her wails starting up again. But this time they sounded different. They didn't sound like the cries of a victim. They sounded like the cries of someone who just got caught. I didn't let Marcus celebrate for long. I told him to sit his ass back down. I wasn't done. Just because she lied doesn't mean he's a saint. In my experience, in houses where children are getting hurt, it's rarely just one person. It's a culture of violence or a culture of silence, and both are equally disgusting. I turned to Marcus. The smirk on his face was one of the most punchable things I've ever seen. He thought he'd won. He thought he was the hero now. I leaned in close to him, so close he could probably smell the coffee on my breath. You think you're clever, Marcus? You think because she failed, you're off the hook? I opened the second set of results. The examiner asked you, Marcus, did you ever strike the child with an object? You said no. Did you witness Sarah hurting the child and failed to report it? You said no. Do you have any direct knowledge of how those injuries occurred? You said no. I looked him dead in the eye. I didn't blink. I wanted him to feel the full force of my contempt. Marcus, the polygraph determined you were also lying. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. Both of them sat there exposed. The two people who were supposed to love that little boy more than life itself had both failed him, and then they had the audacity to come on my stage and try to use me to lie for them. That's what gets me the most. People think I'm just a guy on TV. They think this is a script. It's not a script. Those bruises on that kid weren't makeup. That pain is real. And here I am, sitting between two adults who are acting like children, while a real child is out there somewhere wondering what he did to deserve parents like this. I felt that old familiar heat rising in my chest. It's the same heat I felt as a cop when I'd find a guy hiding in a closet after beating his wife. It's the heat of justice that hasn't been served yet. Look at me. I barked at both of them. Sarah was still sobbing, and Marcus was trying to argue with the air, shaking his head, mumbling about how the machine must be broken. The machine isn't broken, Marcus. Your character is broken. Both of you. You both lied. You both know exactly what happened to that boy, and you both spent the last hour trying to convince me and everyone watching that the other person was the villain. Well, guess what? You're both the villains. You're both the reason that kid is going to have scars, not just on his skin, but on his soul for the rest of his life. I stood up. I couldn't sit near them anymore. I needed to move. I paced the stage. The heavy thud of my boots, the only sound in the room. I've never understood how people can do it. How do you look at a child you brought into this world, and decide that your anger, your frustration, or your convenience is more important than their safety? I went back to the photos of the kid. I held them up so they had to see them. Look at this, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Look at what you did, or look at what you let happen. Because in my book, if you stand by and watch someone hurt a child, you're just as guilty as the one swinging a hand. You both failed the most basic test of being a human being. Sarah tried to speak, tried to give me some half-baked explanation about how Marcus forced her to lie or how she was scared of him. I didn't want to hear it. I told her to save it for the social workers. I told Marcus to save his tough guy routine for the guys he's going to meet in a cell, because if I have anything to say about it, that's exactly where he's heading. The reality is, these people don't think about the consequences. They think they can hide behind the privacy of their own home. They think that as long as there are no witnesses, they can get away with it. They forget that the truth has a way of leaking out. It leaks out through the child's behavior. It leaks out through the inconsistencies in their stories, and eventually it leaks out when they sit across from someone who doesn't buy their bullshit. I've made a career out of not buying bullshit. It's the one thing I'm truly an expert in. I told them both that I was done talking to them. I told them that the police had been notified and that the results of these tests would be handed over to the authorities. The look of pure terror that crossed Marcus's face at that moment was the only thing that gave me any satisfaction. He wasn't worried about his son, he was worried about Marcus. That's the core of the problem. It's the narcissism. It's the idea that they are the center of the universe and everyone else, including their children, are just extras in their movie. I looked at the audience. They were as disgusted as I was. You could see it in their faces, the collective shock that two parents could be so depraved. I've seen a lot of things, but the double fail always hits different. It means there was no safety net for that child. There was no good parent to run to. He was trapped in a house of horrors with two people who were supposed to be his protectors, but turned out to be his predators. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the anger that was vibrating through my limbs. I had to stay professional, but I also had to make sure they understood the gravity of what they'd done. This wasn't just a bad day at the office. This was a turning point. Their lives as they knew them were over, and frankly, it couldn't have happened to two more deserving people. I've seen a lot of things in my time, but the double fail always leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. It's the ultimate betrayal of a child's trust. Most kids, if one parent is the aggressor, they have the other one to run to. They have a sanctuary. But in that house, There was no sanctuary. There was just a choice between which person was going to hurt him that day and which person was going to lie about it the next. I looked at Marcus, who was still trying to find some way to dispute the results. He started talking about the sensors, saying they were too tight, saying he was nervous because I was aggressive. I've heard it all before. It's the machine's fault defense is the last refuge of a coward who's run out of places to hide. I walked right up to him, right into his personal space, and I told him to look at the monitor. I told him that the lines on that graph don't lie. They don't have an agenda. They don't care if he's a tough guy or a victim. They just recorded the fact that when he was asked if he hit his son, his body went into a tailspin because he knew the answer was yes. Then I turned to Sarah. She was still doing the head and hands routine, the silent sobbing that's supposed to make me feel sorry for her. I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt disgusted. I asked her, "How do you do it, Sarah? How do you look at that little boy's face and then swing your hand? How do you watch him cry and then decide that your secret is more important than his safety?" She didn't answer. She just kept crying. But that's the thing about me. I don't care about your tears. I care about your actions. Tears are easy. Changing your life and protecting your child is hard. And clearly, these two weren't interested in doing the hard work. They were interested in the easy way out. They wanted me to tell them they were good people. They wanted a piece of paper they could take to court to prove they weren't the bad parent. Well, they got exactly the opposite. They got the truth, and the truth is that they are both unfit to be in the same room as a child, let alone raising one. I've spent half my life in rooms with people who have done terrible things. I've interviewed murderers, rapists, and thieves. And the one thing they all have in common is the inability to take responsibility. It's always someone else's fault. It's the drugs. It's the alcohol. It's the way they were raised. It's the system. I call bullshit. At some point, you make a choice. You choose to be a man or you choose to be a monster. You choose to protect or you choose to destroy. Marcus and Sarah made their choice long before they stepped onto my stage. They chose themselves over their son. Every time they raised a hand, every time they stayed silent while the other one caused a bruise, they were making a choice. And now the bill has come due. I stood there for a moment, just letting the weight of the situation sink in for everyone. I wanted the audience to see them for what they were. I wanted the people at home to see what happens when you prioritize your own ego over the life of an innocent child. I've been called a lot of things: angry, loud, judgmental. I'll take all of it. I am angry, I am loud, and I am damn sure judgmental when it comes to people who hurt kids. If that makes me the bad guy in their story, I'm fine with that. I'd rather be the guy who tells the truth than the guy who plays along with a lie just to keep the peace. There is no peace for a child living in a home like that. There is only survival. I told Marcus that he needed to leave. I told him that I didn't want him in my sight for 1 second longer. He tried to get one last word in, tried to tell me that I didn't know the whole story. I told him I knew enough. I knew that he lied about hitting his kid. That's the only part of the story that matters. Everything else is just noise. He stood up, still trying to act like he was being wronged, but you could see the fear in his eyes. He knew that once he walked out those doors, he was walking back into a world where he was no longer the one in control. He was walking into a world where he was a documented liar and a child abuser. Good, that's exactly where he belongs. When he was gone, I turned back to Sarah. She looked up at me, maybe hoping that now that the big bad guy was gone, I'd be softer on her. She was wrong. You're no better than him, Sarah, I told her. In fact, in some ways, you're worse. You played the victim, you used your emotions to manipulate the situation, and all the while, you were doing the same thing he was. You failed that boy, you let him down in the most fundamental way possible. She started to protest, started to say that she only did it because she was stressed, because Marcus was making her life a living hell. I stopped her right there. I don't care about your stress. Everyone has stress. Most people don't use their kids as a release valve for it. This is the part where people usually expect some kind of therapy talk. They expect me to tell them that they can change, that they can get help, that they can eventually be a family again. I'm not that guy. My job isn't to fix them. My job is to protect the kid. And from where I'm standing, the only way to protect that kid is to make sure these two never have unsupervised access to him again. I told her that I'd be sending my team to talk to Child Protective Services. I told her that I'd be making sure every piece of evidence we gathered, from the polygraph results to the photos to the recordings of their confessions and lies, ended up on the desk of someone who can take that boy away from them forever. She looked at me like I was the one hurting her. She actually had the nerve to ask, "How could you do that to me?" It's a classic narcissist move. Even now, with her lies exposed, she's still the center of the universe. I looked at her and I said, "I'm not doing anything to you, Sarah. You did this to yourself. You did this to your son. I'm just the one making sure you can't do it anymore. I've seen this movie before. I know how it ends. They'll go home. They'll blame me. They'll blame the show. They'll try to find a lawyer who can spin the results, but they can't unring the bell. They can't erase the fact that on a national stage, they were both revealed to be exactly what they are." I think about that kid a lot. I think about what he's thinking when he hears his parents screaming at each other. I think about the fear he must feel every time a door slams or a voice gets raised. That's what drives me. That's why I don't mind the heat or the criticism. If I could be the one person who stands up and says this is wrong, then it's worth it. If I could be the reason that one child gets moved to a home where they're actually loved and protected, then I've done my job. I'm not a judge, and I'm not a cop anymore, but I still know the difference between right and wrong. And what was happening in that house was dead wrong. It's the silence that gets you. After the shouting stops, after the chairs have been thrown, or the finger pointing has reached its peak, there's this heavy, suffocating silence that settles over the studio. It's the sound of two people realizing they've run out of lives. I stood there looking at Sarah, who was still trying to leak out a few more tears, hoping for a shred of sympathy that was never going to come. I thought about the thousands of hours I spent in patrol cars and interrogation rooms, and it always comes back to the same thing. The truth doesn't need a witness, but a lie needs a whole audience to survive. They came here wanting an audience. They wanted the world to side with one of them so they could feel justified in their own sickness. But the truth doesn't care about your justification. The truth just is. I looked at the photos of that little boy one more time. I wanted to make sure his face was the last thing I saw before I finished with these two. I wanted to carry his image with me so I wouldn't lose my edge, because it's easy to get desensitized in this job. It's easy to just see another case, another file, another pair of failing parents. But I refuse to let that happen. I refuse to become the guy who just goes through the motions. Every time I see a bruise on a child, it's personal. It's a personal insult to everything I believe in. I'm a father. I know what it means to look at your kids and feel like the world is a dangerous place, and you're the only thing standing between them and the dark. These two, Marcus and Sarah, they weren't the shield. They were the dark. I told the audience to look at them. I wanted them to see what it looks like when two people completely vacate their responsibilities as human beings. I've heard people say that I'm too hard on guests, that I should have more compassion or understanding for the cycle of abuse. Let me tell you something about the cycle of abuse. It stops the second you decide to be a man or woman of character. It stops when you decide that your child's safety is more important than your own impulse control. I don't have compassion for people who swing on kids. I don't have understanding for people who watch a child get hurt and then cover it up to stay out of trouble. Understanding is for victims. Accountability is for the people who create them. I walked over to the edge of the stage, away from the toxic cloud these two were putting off. I needed to talk to the people watching. I told them that this isn't just trash TV. This is a mirror. This is what happens when we as a society stop holding people to a standard. We've become so afraid of being judgmental that we've forgotten how to call out evil when it's staring us in the face. And make no mistake, what I saw today was evil. It's a quiet, pathetic, narcissistic kind of evil, but it's evil nonetheless. To hurt a child is a sin. To lie about it and try to blame the person you claim to love is a double sin. I turned back to Sarah. She was looking at me with this blank expression, like she was waiting for the segment to end so she could go backstage and get her hair touched up. I don't think she even realized the gravity of what had just happened. Do you even care? I asked her. Do you even realize that because of what you did and what you let Marcus do, your son is going to have to grow up without you, and that's the best case scenario for him? She blinked, and for a second, I saw a flash of anger, not guilt, not shame, anger. She was mad that I was judging her. She was mad that I was the one holding the cards. I've seen that look on 1,000 faces in handcuffs. It's the look of a person who thinks they're the victim of the law rather than the perpetrator of a crime. I told her I was done. I told her to get off my stage. I didn't want to hear another word, another sob, or another excuse. I've spent 30 years listening to people tell me why they did what they did, and at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that they did it. I watched her walk off, the cameras following her, and I felt a sense of relief that she was out of my sight, but a sense of dread for what comes next for that kid. This is the part people don't see. They see the credits roll and they think the story is over. For that little boy, the story is just beginning. He's going to go into the system. He's going to be moved from house to house. He's going to wonder why his mom and dad didn't love him enough to just tell the truth. I sat back down on my stool, the stage lights feeling a lot hotter than they did an hour ago. I felt the weight of it all. People ask me why I'm so angry. They ask me why I can't just be a normal talk show host. It's because I've seen the alternative. I've seen what happens when no one gets angry. I've seen the cases that get swept under the rug because the paperwork was too much or the witnesses were too scared. I get angry because someone has to. If I'm the only one standing in this room who's willing to yell at the top of my lungs that this is unacceptable, then I'll be that guy. I'll be the guy who gets his hands dirty so the rest of you don't have to. The production crew was moving around me, getting ready for the next segment, but I stayed there for a minute. I needed to decompress. I thought about my time in the Chicago PD. I remembered a call I went on years ago where a kid had been hidden in a crawl space while his parents fought. When we found him, he didn't even cry. He was so used to the chaos that he just shut down. I saw that same look in the photos of the kid from today's case. It's a look that haunts you. It's a look that tells you that the world has already failed him and he's only 5 years old. I'm not a hero. I'm just a guy who's had enough. I'm a guy who's tired of the lies and the games people play with the lives of the innocent. I told my producers to make sure the local authorities in their town had every second of the raw footage. I wanted them to see the way Marcus puffed out his chest and the way Sarah tried to manipulate the room. I wanted the prosecutor to have everything he needed to make sure these two never get another chance to parent. Because parenting is a privilege, not a right. And when you abuse that privilege, you should lose it permanently. There was a finality to it that I haven't felt in a while. Usually, there's one good parent you can lean on, someone you could tell, hey, take your kid and run. But today, there was nowhere to run. The house was rotten from the foundation up. I looked out at the audience, and I could see that they felt it too. It wasn't just another show for them. It was a wake-up call. We like to think that the world is mostly good, that people generally want to do the right thing, but then you meet Marcus and Sarah, and you realize that there's a whole segment of the population that just doesn't have a moral compass. They're just drifting, looking for the next person to blame for their own failures. I stood up and straightened my shirt. I had another show to do, another set of problems to tackle, but this one was going to stay with me. It's the double fail that reminds you why the rangi, the boundaries between right and wrong, have to be ironclad. You can't negotiate with child abuse. You can't middle ground your way through a lie. You either stand for the truth or you're part of the problem. I've made my choice. I stand for the victims. I stand for the kids who are currently sitting in a room somewhere, terrified of the people who are supposed to be their world. If I have to be the loudest, angriest man in the room to make sure they're heard, then that's a price I'm more than willing to pay. I walked back to my dressing room, the heavy thud of my boots on the concrete floor, echoing in the narrow, dimly lit hallway. That's usually the time when the adrenaline starts to fade and the cold, hard reality of what I just witnessed really starts to settle in my gut. People often think that once the camera stops rolling, I just flip a switch and go back to being a normal guy. But it's not that simple. You can't look at those pictures of a bruised child, hear those calculated lies, and see the results of a double-fail polygraph without it leaving a permanent mark on your soul. I sat down in my chair and just stared at the blank wall for a long minute. I kept seeing that little boy's face in my mind, the way his eyes looked in those photos. Wide, guarded, and far too old for his years. He's the real casualty here. Not Sarah's reputation, not Marcus's bruised ego, but that child's fundamental sense of safety in this world. Every time I deal with parents like this, I'm reminded of exactly why I took this job in the first place. It wasn't for the lights, the fame, or the paycheck. It was because After decades on the force in Chicago, I realized that some people in this world only respond to a direct, uncompromising confrontation. They don't want counseling, they don't want to work on themselves or talk about their feelings in a circle. They just want to get away with what they've done. And as long as I have this platform and a microphone, I'm going to make sure that getting away with it is no longer an option for them. I know that somewhere backstage right now, Marcus is probably still trying to convince some producer or a security guard that the machine was rigged or that I was too hard on him. I know Sarah's probably trying to find someone, anyone, to give her a hug and tell her she's still a good mother despite the evidence. But the truth is out in the open now. It's written in black and white on those polygraph reports, and it's been broadcast for everyone to see. There is no going back from a moment like this. There is no spinning this story anymore. I made sure my team followed up with the local police precinct and the social workers in their town before those two even left the building. In cases like this, you simply cannot leave anything to chance. Those two are a clear and present danger to that child, and frankly, to any other child they might come into contact with in the future. If you can lie about hitting a defenseless kid, and you can lie about watching someone else inflict pain on a kid, then you've effectively forfeited your right to be part of a family. You've traded your humanity for a cheap, temporary lie, and the price of that lie is going to be your freedom and your relationship with your son. I hope that boy eventually finds a home where he doesn't have to flinch every time a door slams or someone raises their hand to wave. I hope he finds a place where love isn't something that comes with a bruise or an excuse. I've spent my entire life standing on the line between the predator and the prey. Today, the predators were the very people who were supposed to be the ultimate protectors. It's a sick, twisted reality, but it's one we have to face head on if we ever want things to change. Marcus and Sarah thought they could use me as a tool for their own games. They thought they could use this show to validate their lies and further their own selfish agendas. They were dead wrong. They walked in here thinking they were the ones in control, and they walked out as exactly what they are: documented child abusers and liars. My name is Steve Wilkos, and as long as I'm standing, the truth will always have a voice on this stage, and the innocent will always have a defender. If you see something, say something. Protect the children,